and yet we find it completely missing in any one of these discussions. That is the ultimate takeaway that I want to give you from these 3 episodes. Welcome to the Ryan Holmes podcast, where our goal is to encourage Christian thinking and Christian living. This week, we are bringing you episode 25. And before we get into it, if you have been enjoying the podcast, would you mind giving us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts and leave us a review? That'll help boost its reach and visibility and help get it in front of more people. Or on whatever audio platform you might be using. Would you mind doing that there as well? That will be a huge help. You can go a step further and support the podcast financially and the work that I'm doing by joining our locals community. You can go check out ryanhomespodcast.locals.com and subscribe there for just $5 a month. And our locals community members will get some perks, and you can also check out wretchredeemed.com, WRETCH redeemed.com, and get some merch today. Our locals community members get 10% off every single order in our store. So you can, again, check out the locals community or just go get some merch in our store. That'd be great too. If you prefer video format, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel and like the videos, comment, share them. That'll also be a way of supporting what we are doing here and help the podcast get in front of more people. And if you have any questions, as always, send me an email to ryanhomespodcast@gmail.com. I will link to everything in the show notes below so that you can easily find your way around. Thank you for allowing me those first couple minutes, and I hope that you enjoy today's episode. So today we will be assessing another interview from the Preacher Boys podcast. You can call it part 3 of our trilogy here. You know, I never really anticipated doing 3 of these episodes. I only planned on doing the first one that I did, and that was episode 16, so you can check that out if you want. But I just happened to stumble upon these last 2, the one that I did last week and the one that I'll be covering this week, and we will wrap up the 3 parts today. But I think it's going to be helpful, and it's a good thing to discuss and talk about. You know, we've covered Eric's story. He's the host of the Preacher Boys podcast. We've talked about Jacqueline Chappell's story. And today we will be discussing Travis Chappells' story. Now, I have to, just like I've done in the last 2, I want to give you the reasons as to why I'm doing this. And the reason is because their stories overlap into my world. All 3 of them come from a independent fundamental Baptist background, and that is my background as well. That's a denominational grouping that I used to be a part of also. And so there is a reach and a connection to many of my friends on social media and whatnot, and extended family. Now, my purpose for this, my purpose behind this, is to address the ideas being presented and not to attack the person. And that is very important to me, that we just talk about the ideas. Ultimately, these stories are attacks on Christianity. They are attacks on Jesus. And so I believe that the least thing that I can do is defend my Savior. Not that he needs defending, but I think it's the very least that I can do. And I do think that there is biblical precedent for what I'm doing. Now, this week's episode is going to be a little bit more personal for myself. I was a teammate of Travis's back in our Bible college basketball glory days. I apologize for laughing, but if you played basketball there or if you went to school there, you understand why I'm laughing. Let's just say Bible college basketball is not the most prestigious or glamorous thing, as some people might expect a college basketball experience to be. I loved it. It was a ton of fun. But Travis and I always had a good relationship. We had fun together. We had great times. And I always thought he was a great guy. And I still think he's a great guy. And I have no reason to think otherwise. Now we weren't best friends, close or super close or anything like that. Our relationship um, mostly revolved around basketball and some of our friend groups, but we did have a good relationship nonetheless. I hope and pray that Travis will eventually return to a biblical, historical Christian view and faith and see Jesus beyond what his upbringing provided him. But for now, this is what we have to go off of, his reasons for leaving the faith, and this is what I want to assess today. So it will be the same type of format as last week. I'll play clips for you from the interview, clips that I thought were important to discuss, and then I'm going to talk about those clips. Pretty straightforward. All right, so let's get into it. I will look at clip, we'll play clip number one for you now.
A lot of people that grow up in religious circles talk about that. Like there's a joke about Catholic guilt, you do that with Baptists as well. Like looking back, what are some of the things you look at now and go like, that wasn't healthy. That wasn't a healthy way to form my worldview.
Yeah. Well, that's for sure one of them, guilt. Still to this day, I struggle with guilt from things that I have a completely logical explanation as to why I think that it's totally fine and actually should be encouraged. And I'll still have this just psychological embedding of guilt that comes with it.
So with this first clip, there's going to be some things that I agree with that Travis said, and obviously some things that that I won't fully agree with at the same time. But I can understand, especially coming from the type of culture that he came from within the independent fundamental Baptist kind of culture and world. I think there could be the at least the potential. I think there is active, but I think there's at least the potential for guilt and shame to be used as tools of manipulation to cause people to act in a way that is preferential to the pastor or the leader. I think there's at least the potential for it. I think it does happen, but again, the potential for it. And to the point where you can kind of, it's kind of the hellfire and brimstone type bully pulpit preaching, where you can kind of beat people into submission, and there's almost like a social conditioning and moral conditioning aspect behind it. And this is beyond the scope of biblical prescriptions. It's more preferential at times. And so I think this is present within the IFB world. It doesn't mean that it's every single church, because I wouldn't be balanced in my approach if I said that it was every single church. But it's this culture is definitely alive and well within those circles. And so again, I think guilt and shame can be tools to can be used as tools to beat people into submission and to kind of manipulate their behavior effectively. But I have to say, on the flip side of that, guilt and shame are not, is at least in my opinion, are not inherently bad things. But guilt and shame can be actually seen as good things. I say this because guilt and shame come from what's called our conscience. And I think that our conscience is a gift from God. It is a good thing. Our conscience guides our life, and it at the very least helps us direct our lives towards things that are good and away from things that might be evil. And I do think that people experience guilt or shame whether in religious circles or not. I didn't grow up in the IFB world, but I still very much experienced guilt and shame. And it could depend on how you're wired as well. I think other people experience it more than others, but I do have a high level of a guilt complex where it could be the most minute thing, and I could just be racked with guilt over it. And those are sometimes things that I have to talk myself through and rationalize myself through. But I think that whether you're in a religious circle or not, everybody experience or has experienced guilt and shame at least in some way in their life. Because think about it this way for a second. what types of people are the types of people that don't feel guilt, that don't feel shame, and don't feel any type of remorse for their actions and behaviors. These people are called sociopaths. And these aren't the norm, these are the extreme. They're not the majority, they are the fringe. There is a small percentage of the human population that um, are sociopaths that don't feel guilt, shame, and remorse. So I think that it doesn't matter whether you're in a religious circle or not, you're going to experience it in some way or another. But I think people can take advantage of that, like I said before, and they can become tools that are effectively weaponized against you, uh, where again the preferential ideas of a leader or a pastor uh, can go above and beyond just the Holy Spirit conviction and whatnot. But as well, think about how broken and how messed up and how vile our world can be. Think about how it would be if there was no conscience, if people never felt guilt and shame for their actions, if everyone was a sociopath. You can imagine it being a much darker place. So I think that your conscience that gives you or communicates to you guilt and shame, I think is actually a good thing and is a gift from God. But you can disagree with me if you want, but those are just kind of my thoughts on that. Clip number one. Clip number two.
Some of the other things are more tied to my inner worth and self-worth, self-confidence, and some of those things, because you're taught so much that you're just a worthless piece of garbage and that there's nothing intrinsically good about you, and that the only thing that's good about you is this being that exists beyond the natural world that also exists inside of you, and that's the only thing that redeems how horrible you are. And so a lot of those,
And that affected you as a child.
yeah. So it's interesting because I think as an adult, when you come into that, a lot of your prefrontal cortex is already formed, and a lot of the way that you view the world is formed. And you have the ability to at least think critically to a certain extent, and and your brain can subconsciously or consciously stop certain thoughts from, forming inside of your mind. But when you're a kid like that, it's a blank canvas, and they can paint whatever they want on it. And I think a lot of those things are really, really damaging beliefs to put into a kid's mind. And it's always this thing in the back of my mind that, like, I'm never good enough. I'm not good enough to do anything. I always need help. And I have to directly ask for it, or else I'm not going to do well.
So you can see at the beginning there was kind of somewhat of an oversimplification of some Christian views, maybe even a straw man thrown in there. But let's talk about the idea of worth and value, because he brought this up as an issue. He went on to give an example of confessing sin before a basketball game, so that his team wouldn't perform poorly or they wouldn't lose. And that certainly is an extreme example, and obviously affected him in a real way. And there are some things that I do resonate with, and this can somewhat, I think this does tie into the last clip when we were discussing guilt and shame. But I do affirm and agree with the position that nobody is good. And it's based on the standard of goodness we are talking about, and that is God's perfect nature. So if we're looking at that standard, basing it off that standard, then yes, I think that nobody meets that standard, and therefore nobody is ultimately good, because God is perfectly good, if that makes sense. It doesn't mean that we can't do good or moral things, but at our core, we would still be a sinful person just doing good acts. That's the bad news of the gospel, that we cannot reach perfection or anything like that within ourselves and our own abilities. We are sinful and we are fallen, and we cannot remedy that on our own. But if that's what you are consistently taught, that can be demoralizing for sure. It could affect your worth and your value without the good news of the gospel being consistently shared as well. I know how terribly sinful that I am. I believe that with my whole heart, and I think it's something that's self-evident. I think that others can see that in my own life, and they don't see everything. But This is why the grace and the mercy of God is so amazing, because he can accurately and perfectly judge my sinful heart. He can see everything, and yet he chooses to love me still and extend his grace to me. So it's through the lens of God's accurate judgment of my sin, his grace becomes that much more amazing. Your worth and your value can be directly affected if the gospel is not clearly articulated from the pulpit. But I would like to quickly address the logical outworking of atheism. On atheism, there is also nothing good about you. You are nothing. You are a cosmic accident. You are complex space dust. You are a moist robot. We talked about this in the last episode. There is objectively nothing of value to your life if atheism is true. So I don't think you're left in a better position if atheism is true, because you're left in the same position without any type of remedy. We're going to talk more about moral values and duties later on. They go on, Eric and Travis go on to talk about, being good kids or growing up and being good kids. Obviously, the question would come to mind: what do you mean by good? What standard are you appealing to when you use the term good? So these are all important questions to ask. Let's move on to clip number 3.
But I think for both of us, probably the most traumatizing experience we've had with the church has been saying we don't want to do the status quo thing that the church does.
Yeah.
I think probably both of us would probably still be there if the response had been, you go get them,
Right.
Now, we looked at an astonishing admission by Jacqueline last week, and this is another astonishing admission. And Travis seems to agree with what Eric was saying, that both of them would still be in church if the response from pastors and leaders would have been different. So if you left your faith because your questions weren't answered, that would suggest the issues were intellectual. If it was for intellectual reasons, why would somebody say something like this? That they would still be in church if the response to them wanting to do something else that wasn't ministry related would have been something else. This kind of echoes what Eric said in his first interview that I covered, episode 16, where the entire point was the actions of Christians, and that's the reason that he gave for why he left his faith. So to say that both of them would still be there if the response had been different, it seems to still be based on the actions of Christians and not intellectual reasons. Do you see what I'm saying there? So that's why I think that this is an astonishing admission, and I'm very shocked that they would say this. Now, I don't know for sure if Travis was agreeing with it or not. He kind of said right. So I don't know for sure if he was. He might have just been acknowledging what Eric said, the fact that he was saying something. But from what I got from it, it seems like he was agreeing with it. So I don't know. You can let me know what you think about that. Let's move to clip number 4.
And so I took the part-time job at the church just so that I could tell everybody at West Coast that I was working in ministry, so that they could mark it off on their little list of placing people into ministry and leave me alone about it. And so I went up there, and then that's basically what ended up happening, is I talked to the pastor of that church several times, and I still give him a lot of credit for helping me with this stuff, because he basically sat down. For the first time in my life, I heard somebody tell me that, like, look, if you don't want to do this, we don't want you to do this. And I was like, wait, really? That's an option? Like, that I'd like, God can still be pleased with me, and I don't have to like do this thing that I don't want to do, that I don't feel that my strengths are aligned to do.
Now, I think with this one, I am probably going to agree with everything Travis said. He was talking about his experience at this one church where a pastor, for the first time ever, a pastor encouraged him basically to pursue the things that he wanted to pursue. And I think that was a really good thing. Travis is an incredibly skilled individual. He's skilled at what he does. God has gifted him in a great way to do what he's doing right now. He's far and away more skilled than I will ever be in the areas that he's developed his business, the build your network side of things and whatnot. He's incredibly skilled, and it's impressive to see what he's been able to do. And I'm glad that this pastor encouraged him to pursue what he did pursue. Within kind of the circles that we came from, there is a huge push for people to go into ministry, to the point where you are shamed and you're looked down upon for not going into ministry or not going to Bible college. And I think that many can get caught up in either the pressure or the hype to the point where there's people in ministry who just aren't qualified, or they're not called or gifted in any way. And I think that this is a detriment to the church and to young people, and I just don't think it's helpful, because you end up again with people who aren't pursuing what they're genuinely called to pursue, because they feel bad to tell you, I don't feel like I'm called to ministry. And so, the thing is, we need churches with solid Christian leaders who are not pastors, who are laymen, who are solid Christians, but they're still leaders in the church, who are working a quote unquote secular job. We often pick out leaders, find leaders, and we ship them off to go plant a church. We ship them off to be a missionary or be in ministry or whatnot. And they might not be genuinely called to ministry, but the church needs more solid Christian leaders. And I think at the time, Travis would have been a solid Christian leader in a church without having to be in ministry. The responsibility of the ministry shouldn't be 100% off the pastor's shoulders, or the pastor and his wife, or the leadership team. We need more solid Christian leaders in the church. So this is something that I'm actually going to agree with, because again, I think Travis was gifted in a unique way, and I think it seems like if he was encouraged to do that, and encouraged along the way, who knows what the end result would have been. Maybe it would have looked a lot different, and judging by the last clip, it seems like it would have been different. So, clip number 5.
All of the people that were close to me at that point stopped caring about what was happening to me in my life, or how my life was progressing, just because I was no longer doing the thing that they wanted me to be doing. Mm-hmm. And so I tell people, like, basically everybody in my life at that point was separated into 3 groups. Number 1 is like the screw you group, where it's just the people who were just like, I hope you fail. This is the group of people that were actually and still actively like talk crap about me to other people that I know. I've seen actual text message conversations of people talking crap about the way that I decided to live my life. So there's those people that are like actively rooting against me in every, situation. Mm-hmm. Then there's the second group, which is like my actual real friends that are still rooting for me, but they don't really know how to help me. Oh. Right. Because I'm doing something that's completely different than what any of us know how to do or were raised to do. Yeah. And then the third group is the majority of people, which was, I don't really care. Like, you're not doing the thing that we want you to do. Like, good luck. Hope you do well with it, but I'm not going to help you out and try to help you reach your goal. Yeah.
Our relationship was kind of,
that was kind of the majority of people, was people basically just being like, all right, well, cool, but you're on your own,
I think what Travis is expressing here is at the very least good to help us as Christians kind of self-reflect and think about how we would interact with people in Travis's situation, and kind of the path that he's taken. I've said this before, it's easier to write someone off than it is to continue to be loving towards that person. It's easier to dismiss someone by calling them names or assuming their motives, as opposed to actually engaging with their ideas. So it is a good thing for us to kind of reflect on those things. But on the flip side, I have heard several deconstruction stories, and one thing that has been consistent throughout all of them is how everyone else has failed that individual. Everyone else was to blame for what happened. Other people didn't care, other people didn't help, other people were hateful or abusive, other people didn't answer my questions. They are always the victim in the story. Now, there are legitimate victims in church abuse stories. There's no question about that, and I would never belittle that, and I would never dismiss that. But without fail, everyone else in these situations, what's been consistent, everyone else has been morally inferior to them. I'm not saying this is what Travis feels specifically, but this has been a very consistent theme. I've seen individuals leave, blame Christians for being hateful bigots, and then what do they do online? Spew nothing but hate and bigotry towards Christians. So they effectively leave an alleged hateful, bigoted worldview and just adopt a new one. Now, with that being said, it is crucial that we aim to act like Jesus would act and continue to love someone in this situation, no matter what. Next clip, number 6.
Right. That's
Yeah.
what I'm saying is like, you can't study yourself into faith. Faith is the belief in something without the ability to prove that thing is true,
Yeah.
which is why I get fed up with people who are trying to convince me that they're 100% right. And it's just like, it's impossible to know beyond a shadow of a doubt that you're 100% right about something. It's impossible to know because it is by definition unknowable.
Yeah.
That's okay, by the way.
I agree with Travis that we cannot know what we believe with 100% certainty. Theologians and apologists alike would also agree on this matter. But just because we can't know for sure beyond any doubt, it doesn't mean that we can't be certain beyond reasonable doubt. Just because we cannot be 100% certain, it doesn't mean that we can't be confident in what we believe. Now, Travis does give what I think is an incorrect definition of what faith is. What did he say there? Believing something that you basically can't prove or can't explain to be true. This is basically, the typical kind of internet troll definition of what faith is. It's a straw man. It doesn't accurately reflect a proper definition of what faith is, and it's parroted by, popular atheists like Richard Dawkins and whatnot. And this is certainly it's not what the foremost theologians would say faith is. This isn't the type of faith that we would even get from Hebrews chapter 11. A more accurate Christian definition of what it means to have faith is that faith is trusting in what you have good reason to believe is true. Faith is trusting in what you have good reason to believe is true. And the reality is, everyone has faith. The question is your faith justified or not? Are you exercising good faith or are you exercising bad faith? Even the atheist and the skeptic, they exercise faith, even on a daily basis. I believe I have good reason to believe that Jesus rose from the dead, and I put my faith and trust in that. The faith it takes to believe that Jesus did not rise from the dead, I think, is a greater faith than the faith it takes to believe Jesus did rise from the dead. So I would adamantly disagree with the definition of faith that was provided on that one. Clip number 7.
Circling this topic of family, Dave Ramsey put out a post and it said things you need to know for sure before you get married. It was like where you stand on finances. I forget what the other 4 were. And then one of them was, what you believe. And I just thought that's a really shaky foundation, because if my marriage to Tara was based on first and foremost what we believe,
Yeah.
for both of us, things have drastically changed in the last 5
Right.
or however many years we've been married. I think more importantly, like that doesn't go deep enough. It should be like, how do we deal with conflict? How do we work through ideas? How do we have conversations about difficult things? That's a stronger foundation.
It's the commitment to the process,
Right.
not to the result.
So this is a shaky foundation. Your worldview isn't an important issue to agree on before getting married. I can't relate to this in any way. Dealing with conflict, how you work through ideas, and having difficult conversations are not things that my wife and I knew much about before we got married. These things really couldn't be fully understood until we were married, until we were living together, until we were in close quarters on a daily basis. And just because your views have the potential to change 5 years down the line, it doesn't mean it's not important to be on a similar page going into marriage. It just doesn't follow. This doesn't mean that you don't learn and grow as you move along in your life together as a couple, but I mean, deciding whether your family will be atheists or Christians before going into marriage is probably an important decision to make. Deciding whether your family will be Mormons or Buddhists is probably an important decision to make. So I think the priorities there are drastically flipped because, again, dealing with conflict and those things are things that you ultimately grow and learn while you are married, not before. You don't have those things figured out before. So I think your worldview, the lens in which you see the world, is probably a more important place to start. Clip number 8.
In my opinion, if you're living life the way that you should be living life, you should constantly be changing. Like things
Right.
about you should be different than they were a couple of years ago.
Should be
They're the
learning
same
and
exact-
growing
right,
and
exactly.
yeah.
And if you're presented with new evidence, you should be willing to alter the way that you believe about something. And that was
Not if
kind
you're
of the
right the
point.
first time, buddy.
But that was
Yeah.
one of the big, we're talking about cracks in the dam. That was one of the big cracks in the dam for me, was starting to realize how often I expected everybody else to drop everything that they believed and adopt my worldview.
Yeah.
But as soon as they would turn it around on me, I was like, oh yeah, I'm not going to your mosque.
No, I
Like,
got to figure it out.
I'm not going to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. No, thank
Hey,
you.
but
you know what I mean? Like, it just got to the point where I was like, this feels like the height of hypocrisy, because I'm asking this person
open your heart.
to strip away all context and perspective and facts and information that you've received your entire life, throw it up in the air and adopt all of the things that I believe to be true. But then they want me to do it. And I was like, no, thank you. Get thee behind me, Satan. You know what I mean? And I was just like, oh, wait a second. This feels really wrong. It feels deeply wrong that I'm not willing to at least put on their glasses for a second and see the world through their lens, and then try to have a conversation that might lead to truth. But the scariest part about it is that we don't want to admit that we could potentially be wrong.
Well, Travis, I could potentially be wrong, but that still doesn't mean that I can't have confidence in what I believe to be true. And I think this really does assume that there's no Christian that assesses the worldview of other people and determines whether it aligns with reality or not. But he said a couple things here. You should constantly be changing and learning. My question is, what does that mean, though? Does that mean that your worldview should be constantly changing, or just yourself as an individual? I would agree with the latter. He also mentioned if you're presented with new evidence, you should be willing to change. And I do agree with that. I think you should be willing to change your perspective when presented with compelling evidence that gives you more reason to believe in the differing position over your initial position. But you should not change your perspective simply on the basis of being provided with new evidence. You've got to test that evidence first to see if it is reasonable or not. I'm not sure if that's what Travis was attempting to communicate. That's all I have to go off of. And he did mention, expecting everyone to drop their worldview and adopt his own, and, not being willing to do the same, and this being kind of the height of hypocrisy. And again, there's people who do assess other religions on a regular basis. I've done that. I look into them all the time, and I have good reason to believe that Christianity is true based off Jesus' resurrection. And so that fact alone excludes all other religions. But the Christian perspective is not expecting everyone to simply just drop everything they know and adopt our worldview like it's some sort of debate forum where it's like, hey, my ideas are better than yours, so you should take on my ideas. From a Christian perspective, if you're going to talk about a Christian perspective, it is that God does the transformational work in somebody's heart. We are simply relaying a message. And it is a message that Jesus himself commanded us to deliver. So really, your issue wouldn't be with the Christian. Your issue is with Jesus. The Christian is just being obedient to what Jesus told us to do. And again, at the end there, he talked about it feeling deeply wrong. Like these are value judgments, and like I mentioned earlier, we're going to talk about it later, and we're going to talk about it right now because the next clip is all about that. So let's listen to that.
I see people that I grew up with who I view as good people, but when they decided to leave the way that we grew up, there was never a secondary readdressing of morals and values. And so I think some of them make decisions that are out of integrity and are out of alignment with what even they would probably articulate as a value of theirs, but because they've never actually sat down and done the work to create those values and create a system that you can still live life through without having to worry about Old Testament, New Testament, this person said this person said this, and our elder said this, and our pastor said that, without having to like talk about religion all the time. It's still good to sit down and figure out values that you don't compromise on, that are things that help you live a good version of life. There are the rules that you have set aside that help guide you and help you make good decisions and help you not compromise your integrity, because I still think that those things are extremely important. I just don't think that you have to have like a religion that tells you what they are.
So there's a lot in there, obviously, a lot of moral value language, moral judgment language. And it's something that I covered in episode 24, which is the last episode with the interview with Jacqueline. And so if you didn't hear that, go back and listen to that. But I do want to talk about it still. So please just bear with me if you've already kind of heard this before from me. I want to cover it just in case somebody has listened to this for the first time and it hasn't had the opportunity to listen to the previous episode and whatnot. But again, the questions are always going to come up. You know, you talked about integrity. Why is it a good thing to have integrity? Why should we have moral convictions that we don't compromise on? Why is it a bad thing to compromise on your integrity? These are crucial questions, because if you're talking about moral values and duties, if you are to determine what is actually good or actually not good, you need a standard that you can point to differentiate between what is good and what is evil. It needs to be a standard beyond the mind of the human. Otherwise, it would simply be your opinion against another's. It would just be what you like versus what someone else likes. But neither would actually be right or wrong. Let me give you kind of an illustration on this. If you had one person who believed murder was morally wrong and another person who believed murder was morally right, how would you determine which one was correct? You need a standard beyond their human minds and opinions that would allow you to determine which one was correct. But where would this standard come from? Moral values and duties assume that there are things that you should do and things that you should not do, ways in which you should live your life. But if there are things you should do and things that you should not do, it only makes sense if there is someone to be accountable to. Laws always come from lawgivers. Christians can justify a belief in objective moral values and duties, things that are actually wrong and actually right, because they are rooted in God's perfectly good nature. This is the lawgiver, someone to be accountable to. This is the standard beyond the human mind that allows us to determine what is right and what is wrong. On atheism, one cannot justify a belief in objective moral values and duties, because there is no standard beyond the human mind that would allow you to determine what is actually right or actually wrong. All you could say is, I think this is wrong, or I think this is right, but it would be entirely up to the individual's preference. It would be no different than somebody who likes vanilla ice cream versus someone who likes chocolate ice cream. Like I mentioned in the previous episode, on atheism, there is nothing that is actually right or actually wrong. We are just a cosmic accident. We are highly evolved material. That is it. Now, you can create some sort of moral system for yourself that might make you feel good or make you feel like you're living a good life. But again, if atheism is true, it would basically just be fantasy and delusion. All right, clip number 10.
And there's not a lot, like you said, there's not a lot out there for people who are trying to figure out what their place is in the world, you know,
Right. Without subscribing to another form of religious
or another
dogma.
toxic one.
That's right. That's what I'm saying. Like you can't, that's why we want to talk about it, man. Like I want to talk about Stoic philosophy, and I want to talk about some of these other like great thinkers that have come and gone who provide a good system of how to live life, but without making you subscribe to this religious dogma that is ruling you with guilt.
Obviously, we already talked about, guilt and whatnot. And I was thinking of really not playing this clip at all for you guys. But when I wasn't really going to talk about his reference to Stoic philosophy at all until I just decided to kind of peruse the internet a little bit and look into it somewhat. And then I just thought it was fascinating, and I think it's something that it's important for me to share with you, especially with somebody who is deciding to leave a religious system and worldview. It's incredibly important, and there's a couple articles that I'm going to reference. The first kind of excerpt from the first article is more kind of surface level. It really does sound kind of like a self-helpism type framework. So I'm just going to read it for you, and then we'll get to obviously the next one. But here's the excerpt about this is on Stoic philosophy or Stoicism. All right. So listen to this. Simply put, Stoicism was designed to help people live their best possible lives. It's a philosophy of life that maximizes positive emotions, reduces negative emotions, and helps individuals to hone their virtues of character. Another moral language there. At any moment, in any situation, and at any stage of life, Stoicism provides a framework for living well. It reminds people of what is truly important, providing practical strategies to get more of what is valuable. Stoicism was deliberately created to be understandable, actionable, and useful. Practicing Stoicism doesn't require learning an entirely new philosophical lexicon or meditating for hours a day. Instead, it offers an immediate, useful, and practical way to find tranquility and improve one's strengths of character. Character is more moral type language. The next portion I'm going to read from you is from a different article that is a little bit deeper, a little bit more of an explanation of what Stoic philosophy or Stoicism is. So listen to this. The Stoics did, in fact, hold that emotions like fear or envy, or impassioned sexual attachments or passionate love of anything whatsoever, either were or arose from false judgments, and that the sage is, they say, a person who had attained moral and intellectual perfection. So the sage is somebody who attained moral and intellectual perfection, which is very interesting, would not undergo them. So let me read that again. The Stoics did, in fact, hold that emotions like fear or envy, or impassioned sexual attachments, or passionate love of anything whatsoever, either were or arose from false judgments, and that the sage, a person who had attained moral and intellectual perfection, would not undergo them. The later Stoics of Roman imperial times, Seneca and Epictetus, emphasized the doctrines already central to early Stoics' teachings, that the sage is utterly immune to misfortune, and that virtue is sufficient for happiness. Our phrase "Stoic calm" perhaps encapsulates the general drift of these claims. So essentially, somebody can reach moral and intellectual perfection, which is quite interesting. Now, there were founders or heads to the Stoic school of thought, and basically from their writings is where we get the Stoic school of thought, Stoic philosophy. That's what Stoicism is derived from their writings, which is very interesting. These couple last points here are also super interesting. So listen to this. It is important to remember that they think of philosophy not as an interesting pastime or even a particular body of knowledge, but as a way of life. They define philosophy as a kind of practice or exercise in the expertise concerning what is beneficial. Now listen to this last portion. Once we come to know what we and the world around us are really like, and especially the nature of value, we will be utterly transformed. So this is a worldview that suggests that there's the potential to attain moral and intellectual perfection. There's founders that these ideas are based on, the writings of these founders or texts. It's more than just an interesting pastime. It's a way of life that is actively practiced and exercised. And there's a potential, if you understand these things fully, that you will be utterly transformed. So there's moral values, there's founders these are based on, there's writings or texts, this is a way of life, something that's practiced, and the potential to be utterly transformed. To me, this sounds like another religious worldview system. So if this is indeed what Travis is pursuing, I don't see any other way of explaining that he has left one religious system for another religious system. I don't see any other way of explaining it, which is very interesting to me. But I would love to hear your thoughts on that specifically. Next clip, number 11. We've got two more.
Because growing up, if you're listening to this show, you're probably in the same boat, which is you were always told what to think growing up. There's no room for critical thinking. Yeah. There's no room for, again, how to think. They teach you exactly what to think and why you should think it. That's it. And 90% of people that go through miss the why part. They only get the what part. They miss the why part, but there's never a how. There's never a how to come to this conclusion on your own type of a thing. There's never a here's what we're talking about. What do you think the conclusion is? It's this is the exact thing that's correct. Everything else is wrong.
Now there's a portion of this I would certainly agree with within kind of the circles that, or the culture that he grew up in. There is a level of, being taught exactly what to think, and that everything that's being taught is exactly correct. Now we've got to understand that that Christian thought, Christian doctrine, Christian belief falls into different categories. There's the open-handed issues that aren't as crucial, and then there's the closed-handed issues that are really non-negotiables, such as the fact that Jesus was God, or that he did indeed rise from the dead. And these views fall into like primary issues and secondary issues. But what is a disservice to the believer is that if you teach that everything is a primary issue, because if everything is a primary issue, and one thing falls, doubt comes in one area, then the whole thing starts to crumble. But for me, I can be confident in my faith and still not be 100% certain, still not know where I fall on an abundance of issues. But I can have confidence in the fact that Jesus did indeed rise from the dead, because that's what my faith hinges on. And I think it's very true that there is truth behind the fact that a lot of believers aren't taught how to think or why they think what they believe to be true is true. And so I think there is some truth to that. But here's the thing: you can't assume that what you experience in one denomination or one church is consistent throughout all of Christianity. I do acknowledge that the church within the 21st century has failed people in these areas, in teaching and mainly just apologetics, really. But historically, Christianity has been a faith of intellectual rigor, and I think you can prove that undeniably. Let's just list off a few names here. Francis Bacon, who developed the scientific method, a Christian. Johannes Kepler, who developed the laws of planetary motion, a Christian. Galileo, who convinced the scientific field that the sun was the center of the universe, Christian. Robert Boyle founded modern chemistry, a Christian. Gregor Mendel founded genetics, Christian. Louis Pasteur, Lord Calvin, all Christian. So Christianity certainly has a history of intellectual thought. And honestly, you wouldn't have science today the way we find it without Christianity, or modern medicine even, or even education. And it's the impact that Jesus has on not just Western world, but on the whole world entirely, but especially Western world and our culture is amazing. And there's actually a book out right now called Person of Interest, and J. Warner Wallace put out that book as well. Just the amazing impact that Christianity has had on our world. And I kind of got off on a side tangent there, but something that's very, very helpful. So let's move on to the last clip of the episode. And so we'll play it for you and we'll unpack it.
Question the things that you were taught in a healthy way that leads to good conversation, a creation of your own value system in a way that you can live life that makes sense for you and for your family, without judgment. So like our whole thing is basically like teaching people to question more things, create value from those things, and find meaning through the values that they create in their life. And we're like I said, we're not going to try to come at it from a position of we know everything and we understand everything, because we admittedly don't. Our goal is basically just to bring people on to continue the conversation and have a healthy place where people can come in the community, for people to come and talk through some of these things without getting yelled at or shouting angrily at somebody because they hold a different belief than you. It's just kind of like because I miss some of that. I miss the community part of church, I miss being able to go every week to see people that I like hanging out with. And I miss some of those aspects of it. And so we're going to try to bring back a little bit of that, but in a way that's healthy.
So there at the beginning, Travis kind of mentions questioning things in a healthy way. And I think this kind of last clip is in reference to their new podcast and the community they are trying to establish and build through that podcast. And so one of the goals is to question things in a healthy way. So the question that I would ask is what is a healthy way of questioning things? What are healthy questions to ask? The MO for the podcast, or at least one of their statements, is question everything. So you have to ask yourself, is that a healthy way to question things? To just simply question everything? In my opinion, I would suggest that this is an unhealthy way of approaching it, because I think an unhealthy way of questioning is questioning everything just for the sake of questioning. This in my mind is unhealthy. It would be unhealthy to question things that you have good reason to believe. That doesn't mean that you never try and learn. That doesn't mean that you never put your views to the test. But just, I think questioning for the sake of questioning isn't a healthy way of approaching things. And I don't see how you can establish values or views for your life from a position of questioning, because there's nothing really concrete there to build off of, if that makes sense. But one thing that I thought of is, they're trying to build this community of skeptics effectively, and the whole idea is question everything. But I wonder if they are skeptical of their own skepticism, because they seem to be very comfortable and solid in their position now. But if they are to question everything, I wonder, really, do they question their own questioning? Are they skeptical of their own skepticism? Something to think about for sure. Again, he talks about creating values and finding meaning. Again, the use of, value judgment and value language there. But I'll reiterate, not trying to beat a dead horse, but on atheism, there is no such thing as meaning, purpose, or value to anything whatsoever. He also mentioned, talking or creating an environment that doesn't have judgment, or where people don't experience judgment. I think there is an underlying assumption to this that, say, for example, in the old Christian setting that they used to be a part of, they would receive judgment for asking questions and whatnot. And I don't think that's consistent throughout all of Christianity. And the irony is that assuming that you're going to get judgment within a Christian setting is a judgment. It assumes that all Christians are judgmental without having met all Christians. The reality of life is that everyone makes judgments every single day of their life. Everybody does it. In fact, the interviews that we have covered have been riddled with judgments of Christians. Now, another thing he says is, they admit to not knowing everything except when it comes to Christianity. They are positive that Christianity is not true. So there's a bit of an irony there as well. He also mentioned, there's a lot in this clip. He mentioned, creating a community where you're not going to get yelled at, or shouted down for just simply having a differing position. So, and I don't know exactly what he's trying to suggest here, that all Christians yell at or shout loudly or shout down those who they disagree with. I mean, I know some pretty hostile and belligerent atheists and skeptics, so I don't really know if there's an actual point being made here or just a shot that's being taken. But the last thing he mentions in this clip is, missing that, the fact that they miss the community, and they want to bring that back, but in a healthy way. I'll reiterate, I wish they would have broadened their horizons a little bit. I've experienced churches where you have really great community, and so again, I just don't know really that there's much there. And again, they want church. They just don't want anything that actually makes the church the church. As we conclude, again, this is not necessarily, it sounds kind of counterintuitive, but it's not necessarily for Eric, Jacqueline, or Travis. I don't expect this to make a huge impact on their lives. They may never ever hear it, and that's okay. This is mainly for those who might be swayed by the things that are being said, or think that these are good reasons to abandon their own Christian faith. And I say it's not for them because I'm not convinced that they are actually interested in discussions with Christians or about discussions about Christianity, that they're open to it. And this is based on the things that they've said. Throughout these interviews, they've been a little bit dismissive of people who attempt to reach out to them, for example, or send them a book or whatnot. They kind of talk about how they've done all the studying, they've read the books, and things like that. Eric has even mentioned in his interview that basically telling people don't send me messages and whatnot. But then he kind of flipped and said he's open to discussion. So I don't really know. I don't really know where they land on these things, but yeah, it seems to be that they're not really interested based on the things that they've said. But this is the point that I want to make right now is honestly the point that I've been wanting to get at this entire time, this podcast, and through the 3 episodes that I've covered. And this is a crucial point that I want to stress, and the most important thing that you should take away from this. I've listened to 2 hours, 20 minutes, and 10 seconds worth of discussion. 3 interviews covering 3 different stories of why 3 individuals left the Christian faith. And there's a lot there. There was a lot that was said, but I want to be very clear. And this is not, I'm not saying this for dramatic effect. This isn't hyperbole, but there wasn't one argument provided against Christianity. Not one legitimate argument provided that would suggest that Christianity is not true. That's what I was hoping to respond to when I approached these interviews. Just whatever it could be. I don't think Jesus actually rose from the dead, and here's why. I don't think God exists, and here's why. I don't think the Bible can be trusted, and here's why. Anything. That's what I was looking for. That's what I was hoping for. But we got nothing. We got complaints against Christians, sure, but no real actual argument against Christianity that would suggest that Christianity isn't true or can't be true. Which is extremely interesting to me, because they do mention studying things out, that they suggest that they've essentially done their homework on these things. But here's the thing: if you had done your studying, come to conclusions based on reasoning, and then left your faith, would you think that would be what you would lead with when you are talking about your faith loss story? And yet we find it completely missing in any one of these discussions. That is the ultimate takeaway that I want to give you from these 3 episodes. So if you listened to these stories and thought, yeah, this is good justification to leave Christianity, you would be sadly mistaken, because nothing like that was provided. I mean, these are topics that you just need to talk about or discuss. How do you explain how our universe came into existence out of nothing? How is our universe so specifically fine-tuned to allow for life on Earth? Where did the astonishing amount of information that is foundational to all of life and that communicates a message, where did it come from? How did life begin with complexity? Where did objective moral values and duties come from? What about the historical accuracy of the Bible and the manuscript evidence that supports it? How do you explain the major events surrounding Jesus' crucifixion? That he was crucified on a cross, he was buried in a known private tomb, that the tomb was found empty, that there were over 500 accounts of people allegedly seeing Jesus alive after his death, and the fact that all of his disciples were willing to die for this belief without recanting. These are the types of questions I wish to know, because based on these lines of evidence, these lines of thought, these questions, I find it extremely hard to believe, number one, that God doesn't exist. I think it takes a greater amount of faith. And number two, that I find it hard to believe that Jesus didn't rise from the dead. I think it takes a greater amount of faith to believe that he didn't, as opposed to believing that he did. And I wish an attempt would have been made to cover some of these things, because that's really what I was looking for, but we didn't get it. Now, these are sad stories for sure. We should pray for Eric, Jacqueline, and Travis. We should love them, but loving them doesn't mean that we affirm everything that they say. We can respectfully and lovingly disagree and even challenge the ideas that they present. Now, I would love to hear from you. I would love to hear your thoughts on this episode or the interviews, and just to let me know what you think. Let me know if I've been fair in my approach to this, and if you feel that I covered everything well. I'd just love to hear from you. All right, so please don't hesitate to reach out. And that'll do it for today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you have any questions for me, please send me an email to ryanhomespodcast@gmail.com. Don't forget to visit ryanhomespodcast.locals.com to join our community. I appreciate any support. And if you're on the YouTube, like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell, and ultimately, please share this podcast, and let's encourage others to think about their faith and live it out. See you next week.